So this is my simple example. You've had me before. You've seen this example before. I use the same XML example in every XML class I teach. Class I teach. This is a simple catalog. I made up my tags myself, so it does not adhere to any industry standards whatsoever. So don't go thinking that this is in any way a standardized document. But it shows you the basic structure of an XML document. Every XML document starts with and tells you what XML version you're using. Then you have a root tag, which has to surround all the data in the document. I have an item. It has an ID of 1. The ID is an attribute. And then I have the item contains a category ID, a name, a description, an image, and a thumbnail, and then it ends. And so I have multiple items. I think I have 4 items within my catalog. It's not a very big catalog, but I have 4 items within my catalog. So, so the root element of this is called the catalog element. The nested elements, item is nested inside of catalog. Item is a child of the catalog element. Then item has then data nested inside of it. It has a category, and I didn't change it. Category ID, a name, a description, an image, and a thumbnail, which is another image file. Category is, okay, this goes with a data for a fictitious website that I develop in some of my classes. The category is, it could be, I sell different categories of things in my company. All of these things in my file, I think, are category 5, which is women's clothing. But they also sold camping gear and different categories of items. No, they're all category 5. Yeah, they were all category 5. So potentially my XML file could have like 100 products, and the products would be in different categories. So when you display the products on a website, you would get them, women's clothing would be different than camping gear. Okay? So the XML rules is all documents must have a root tag. So they must have a single tag pair root. You have a child element, which is nested inside the root. You have a subchild. You can have actually tags nested within tags, nested within tags. XML actually is useful for storing like object-oriented data where it's not just a flat table. You can have data like table data nested inside of tables, and I'll show you an example of that. So you can have an array of items, for instance, nested inside another item. So it allows you to nest as many elements as you like within the root tag. The tags are case sensitive in XML. They're not case sensitive in HTML. So name with a lowercase is not the same as name with an uppercase. If you're using a single tag, it has to have a little slashy before the closing greater than sign to tell it, I don't have a closing tag. Otherwise, you'll get an error message when it tries to parse your file because it assumes every opening tag will have to have a closing tag. XML elements must be properly nested. You must close the most recently opened tag first. So if an example, if you had bold and italic, if the bold is on the outside, you can't close italic before bold. Bold before italic. If you do open bold, open italic, you can't do close bold, close italic. You have to do close the most recently opened tag. Works just like parentheses in programming. When you have a closing parenthesis, you're closing the most recently opened parentheses first. It's just that these parentheses happen to have names. XML elements can have attributes. You put in an attribute in an XML element, you want to put it in double quotes. Or single quotes, I lied. You can do single, you want to put it in quotes. Yes? Yes, I am. I'm going to, as a matter of fact, we had somebody ask that question in the discussion forum today, was when should you use attributes and when should you use elements? And I will say that like in I don't know, 15, 20 seconds, depending on how fast I talk. You can have a comment. I made this image because it's useful when you're thinking of an XML document to think of it in terms of a tree. The language used to describe an XML document is the same language you would use to describe a tree data structure. So you can think of the root element as the topmost portion of the tree. Everything that's then nested inside the root element is its immediate child. So item with ID of 1, item with ID of 2 are both nested children of the root element. Then the item also then has children. It has category ID, name, image, description, and thumbnail. So each item has its own nested set of data. So if you think of it as a tree, when you're traversing and actually writing code to access data in an XML file, you're actually working on the basic tree structure. And when they're talking about XML document, they talk about the parent and the child. They talk about ancestors, and ancestors are anybody that's above you. So for the name element, one of its ancestors would be catalog, item and catalog. Then you have descendants, which are your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, however many people are under you. Elements have content. So you can have simple. Yeah, it can have element content. So an element that contains other elements has element content. So the catalog has element content. The item has element content. Simple content is stuff that contains data. So the name has text inside it. That's a simple element. You can have an empty content with an element that has no data inside of it. Mixed content is you can actually have an element that has text and other elements inside of it. I haven't seen that used as much. So, all right, now I'm getting to attributes. Yes. Attributes. In HTML and XML, you can have attributes. Attributes are essentially anything that's inside the opening tag for the element. It's got a name and an equal sign and a value, and in XML, the value has to be in quotes, single or double, but it must be in quotes. Now, you can, because you can do whatever you want in an XML document, you can actually create XML documents that are all attributes and no data in the elements, or you can have all elements and no attributes. And it is a matter of confusion as to when is it appropriate to create it as an attribute, and when is it appropriate to create it as an element. Generally, an attribute is usually used for metadata, so not really the data of interest you're storing in your document. So, for instance, in my XML document, had an attribute of ID. We don't really care what the ID is. We care what the product name is, its description, its price, that kind of thing. But we don't care. An ID is like something that I use to keep track of the element, but it's not of general interest. So it's an attribute. It's kind of metadata I use about my item. And then I used it here, file type equals GIF, and then my file name is computer.gif. So again, it's metadata. It's telling me something about that file. But the data I really care about is the file name. So another example I've seen is if you've got a price, of an item price, and you would want to have the price data $39.99. You'd want to have that data between the opening price tag and the closing price tag. That's data of interest. But if you're decided to track what currency the price was in, you could have that as an attribute of that. Currency equals US dollars. Because that's in metadata. So it's a little bit of information giving me a little bit of background on that particular data item. The data I really care about is in the element. So this is bad. I have my note that I had before, and I set the ID is 361A, the day is 12, the month is 11, the year is 2005, to Don, from Jahan, heading. So all of those things in attributes. One, it's really, really hard to read. And two, it's a little bit more difficult to parse, and you're not looking at your data of interest. When you're using a style sheet, You can actually do a cascading style sheet, and it'll display anything in between the element tags in pretty style. But it won't display the attributes. You have to write specialized code to get the attributes out. So it's much better. You can put the note ID as 361A, but then to have all of the pertinent data about the note should be in elements. So, my rule of thumb is when in doubt, make it an element instead of an attribute. Because you can do an awful lot more with an element than you can with an attribute. An element can have sub-elements. You can put nested elements inside of it. You can put attributes in an element. Obviously, you can't add an attribute to an attribute. So, much better to have your data of interest in an element than an attribute. So the XML advantage, I've talked about them. Simply a markup language of the platform independence is your big XML advantage. The big XML disadvantage is directly related to the big XML advantage. See, the big XML advantage is XML is text-based. The big XML disadvantage is XML is text-based. Kind of hard to fix it when your advantage is your disadvantage. But the fact that it's text, you have all of these tags around all of your data, it makes your files large. And transferring the files then becomes inefficient. There are some solutions. I mean, some people are transferring XML files like zipped or compressed in some way. But you're still going to have to decide if you're using XML. You've got a time sensitive, you have to transfer the data in 3 milliseconds, and you're transferring a terabyte of data in an XML file. It may not work. You may have to do something else. So it's definitely a trade-off that you have to decide, what are my data transfer requirements on time, and is it possible with current technology and using XML? And it may not be. The other problem, of course, is XML doesn't solve the problem of incompatible data formats. If you call you store 25 items for a product and I store 15, and they don't have the same tags, we're still going to have to figure out what items that you track for a product are the same as the items that I track for a product. You still have to do that translation. Or you have to accept a global standard that you're willing to adhere to, and all of the people you work with are willing to adhere to.